You didn't wake up one morning and decide this would be your life. There was no dramatic moment, no rebellion, no conscious surrender. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because when something breaks loudly, you notice. But when it shifts quietly, you adjust. Your life makes sense. Your job makes sense. Your routine makes sense. From the outside, it looks stable, responsible, even impressive. But inside, there's a distance you can't fully explain. Like you're living a life that fits you perfectly on paper, but feels slightly foreign in your body. You move through your days efficiently. You answer, you adapt, you handle what's expected of you. And then usually late at night, when the noise slows down, a small question appears. When did this become my life? Not in a crisis, not in a breakdown, just a quiet, unsettling awareness that you don't remember choosing it. And the most unsettling part is that nothing feels wrong enough to justify changing it. You're not miserable. You're not failing. You're functioning. We're taught to believe that functioning means alignment, that if things are working, but they must be right. I believed that too. That stability meant I had chosen correctly. But working is not the same as chosen. And this is where the real danger hides. Because if you never consciously chose it, you may spend years defending it, protecting it, building it further, becoming better at a life you never meant to live. Somewhere along the way, you stopped steering and started responding to opportunities, to expectations, to what was rewarded, to what felt safe. And slowly, almost invisibly, your life began forming around you, instead of from you. We don't notice the shift when it happens. There's no alarm, no warning, just momentum. And momentum can carry you very far, in a direction you never actually decided. Now you're here, maintaining it, optimizing it, explaining it, but not fully inside it. And if you're honest, there's a quiet part of you that knows this life didn't begin with a decision. It began with a drift, and drift feels harmless until you realize how far it can take you. And here's the part most people avoid. You tell yourself this is normal, that everyone feels this at some point. That adulthood just feels heavier, more practical, less emotional. You call it maturity, you call it responsibility, you call it growing up. But let me ask you something. If this is maturity, why does it feel like something inside you went quiet? Not calmer, not wiser, quieter. Plato once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Most people misunderstand that line. They think it means you need to analyze everything, overthink everything, question everything. But that's not what he meant. An unexamined life isn't chaotic. It's automatic. It's when you move from one decision to the next, without ever stopping to ask, is this mine? You don't consciously choose the job. You choose stability. You don't consciously choose the relationship. You choose safety. You don't consciously choose the routine. You choose predictability. And over time, the pattern becomes your identity. We rarely notice this happening because nothing feels dramatically wrong. It just feels slightly off, slightly distant, slightly borrowed. And this is the dangerous part. Not that you chose badly, but that you may never have paused long enough to choose it all. There's a difference between building a life and inheriting one, between deciding and drifting. And if you've never questioned how you arrived here, you may spend years perfecting something that was never consciously yours. That's why this feeling doesn't go away, because it isn't about success or failure. It's about authorship. And somewhere along the way, you stopped being the author and became the character. At some point, you stopped asking what you wanted and started asking what made sense. That shift feels small, almost responsible. You tell yourself you're being realistic, practical, mature, but practicality has a quiet side effect. It slowly replaces desire. You don't notice it the first time you choose stability over curiosity. You don't notice it the first time you stay somewhere because it's good enough. You don't notice it when you silence a thought that feels inconvenient. But those moments accumulate. A job you didn't love, but accepted. A path you didn't question because it worked. A version of yourself that felt acceptable, so you kept it. And over time, you become efficient at living a life that requires less of your real voice. There's a scene that repeats in more lives than we admit. You're in a meeting. You have an idea. It's slightly different, slightly risky. And before you speak, you edit it so it sounds safer, more aligned, more reasonable. No one notices the edit, but you do. Or you're at dinner with people who think they know you. They describe you stable, reliable, level-headed, and you smile because they're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. There's a version of you that used to be louder, curious, restless. But that version became inconvenient. And inconvenience rarely gets rewarded. Nietzsche warned about something he called the last man. It sounds dramatic, but it's not about destruction. It's about comfort. The last man chooses safety over intensity, predictability over possibility, approval over authenticity, not because he is evil, but because he is tired. And comfort is easier than conviction. When Nietzsche described that state, he wasn't condemning people. He was describing what happens when a society quietly trains individuals to prefer security over self-creation. Self-creation sounds abstract, so let's make it simple. Self-creation means this: you are consciously shaping who you become, not just reacting to what is available. When you stop shaping and only start responding, you don't collapse, you stabilize. And stability feels like success until it starts to feel like confinement. We rarely recognize the moment we trade aliveness for approval. Because the trade feels reasonable. You tell yourself, I can explore later. I'll figure myself out once things are secure. I just need to get through this stage. But stages become structures, and structures become identities. And identities are hard to question when they're praised. That's the part no one talks about. It's easier to reject a life that is clearly wrong. It's much harder to question a life that works. You're not suffering enough to justify leaving. You're not miserable enough to explain your discomfort. So you stay. And staying becomes loyalty. You defend your path. You explain it. You rationalize it. Because if you admit you drifted into it, you have to face something more uncomfortable. You have to face the possibility that you were always capable of choosing differently. And that realization is heavier than most people are willing to carry. There's another scene. It's late. You're alone, scrolling, not because you need anything, but because you feel slightly displaced inside your own space. You close the app, put the phone down, and for a moment, you feel it, that faint gap between who you were living as and who you once imagined becoming. You quickly distract yourself, because that gap is destabilizing, and we are not taught to destabilize our own lives. We are taught to optimize them. Optimize income, optimize productivity, optimize image, but rarely optimize alignment. And when alignment is ignored long enough, you begin to feel like a well-designed system with no clear author. You know how to operate your life, but you're not sure how it began. That's the inner conflict. You're competent, but not convinced. You're stable, but not certain. You're moving, but not choosing. And this is where the danger deepens, because when you live long enough in response mode, you start to mistake adaptation for identity. You say, this is just who I am. I'm practical. I'm not that ambitious. I'm not that creative. I'm not that type of person. But are those truths, or are they adjustments? Adjustments repeated long enough begin to feel permanent. And the longer you live inside them, the harder it becomes to remember what you were before you started negotiating yourself. And that's the quiet fear underneath all of this. Not that you chose wrong, but that you stopped choosing at all. And once you stop choosing, life doesn't collapse. It continues, smoothly, predictably, successfully, until one day, you wake up inside something that works, but doesn't feel authored by you. And that realization is not dramatic. It's subtle, but it changes the way you see everything. There's a word for what begins to happen next. Most people never learn it, so they never recognize it. The word is self-alienation. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. Self-alienation is when you no longer feel at home inside your own decisions. It's when your life continues, but your inner voice becomes quieter. Not because it disappeared, but because it stopped being consulted. You still wake up. You still move through your routines. You still make choices. But those choices feel automatic, expected, almost pre-written. And here's the part that makes this hard to admit. Nothing about your life is obviously wrong. You are not being forced. You are not being controlled. You are not trapped in some dramatic external prison. The structure is invisible. It's made of habits, expectations, comfort, momentum. And the longer you live inside momentum, the more unnatural it feels to interrupt it. There's a subtle fear underneath all of this. Not fear of failure, fear of disruption. If you question your path, what else might unravel? If you admit this isn't fully yours, what does that say about the years you invested? We don't just build lives. We defend them. We justify them. We protect them. Because if we question them, we risk destabilizing our identity. And identity feels like survival. That's why self-alienation is so quiet. You don't feel like you're betraying yourself. You feel like you're being responsible. You tell yourself, this is just adulthood. This is what stability looks like. This is what growth feels like. But growth should not feel like disappearance. Maturity should not feel like shrinking. And stability should not require you to silence the parts of you that once felt alive. There's another scene. You're talking to someone new. They ask what you do. You answer automatically. You describe your role, your responsibilities, your achievements. And as you speak, you feel slightly detached from the description, as if you're summarizing someone else. It's accurate, but it's incomplete, because what you do is not the same as who you are. And when your life becomes defined by what you do, instead of who you are becoming, you slowly start living from the outside in. We are rarely taught to notice this shift. We are taught to achieve, to accumulate, to progress, but not to pause, not to examine, not to ask the uncomfortable question. If I stripped away the rewards, would I still choose this? That question is destabilizing. Because if the answer is uncertain, then so is your sense of authorship. And authorship is what makes life feel like yours. Without it, you can have success, you can have admiration, you can have stability, but you may not have ownership. And ownership is different from possession. You can possess a life. Without owning it, you can maintain a path. Without choosing it, you can succeed in something without feeling aligned with it. And that's the quiet fracture most people carry. You look competent, but inside, you feel slightly misplaced. You keep moving, but you don't feel like you're directing the movement. And the longer you ignore that feeling, the more it starts to blur into your identity. You stop saying, this doesn't feel like me, and start saying, maybe this is just who I am. That's the moment self-alienation becomes internalized. You stop questioning the structure and start questioning yourself. You assume your discomfort means you're ungrateful, restless, too idealistic, so you suppress it. You optimize instead. You become better at playing the role, more efficient, more controlled, more composed, and everyone around you sees improvement. But inside, something feels further away than it did before. This is why the distance grows quietly, because the world rewards adaptation, but it rarely rewards authenticity when it disrupts comfort. And if you've lived long enough inside adaptation, authenticity starts to feel risky, even irrational. So you stay steady, you stay reasonable, you stay aligned with expectations, and the gap between who you are living as and who you might have been becomes harder to measure. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just subtle, persistent, present. And if you're honest, there are moments where you sense it, a faint awareness that this life feels structured, but not authored, stable, but not entirely chosen, successful, but slightly borrowed. And that awareness doesn't scream, it whispers. But whispers are powerful, because once you hear them, they're difficult to unhear. The longer you live inside a life you didn't consciously choose, the more convincing it becomes. You get better at explaining it, better at defending it, better at performing it. And performance is powerful, because if you perform something long enough, you start believing it. You say things like, this is just who I am now. I've changed. My priorities are different. And maybe they are. But there's a difference between evolving and adjusting. Evolution expands you. Adjustment contains you. And if you look closely, you can feel which one this is. There are moments when your body reacts before your mind does. A conversation that leaves you strangely drained. A promotion that feels impressive but hollow. A weekend that passes quietly, without leaving a memory. You tell yourself you're just tired, just stressed, just busy. But exhaustion is not always about effort. Sometimes it's about misalignment. It's about spending years reinforcing a version of yourself that never fully felt true. We underestimate how heavy that becomes. Waking up every day and stepping into a role, not a fake role, just a partial one. A version of you that is socially acceptable, professionally valuable, emotionally manageable, but not entirely honest. And honesty is expensive, because honesty destabilizes. If you admitted how unsure you feel, would your life still look stable? If you admitted you're not fully aligned, would people understand? Or would they question your gratitude, your ambition, your maturity? So you stay consistent. Consistency becomes identity, and identity becomes obligation. You feel responsible for maintaining the life you built, even if you don't feel fully alive inside it. This is the quiet trap, not external pressure, internal loyalty. Loyalty to your own structure. You tell yourself, I can't just change direction. I've invested too much. I've built too much. And maybe that's true. But there's a deeper question underneath that fear. If you never chose this consciously, What exactly are you protecting? Security or momentum? Because momentum feels powerful. It keeps everything moving. It prevents collapse. But momentum doesn't ask whether the direction is yours. It only asks whether you're still moving. And movement can hide a lot. You can move forward while drifting further from yourself. You can achieve more while feeling less. You can look successful while internally asking a question you're afraid to say out loud. Is this it? That question doesn't come with anger. It comes with quiet confusion. Because nothing is broken. Nothing is collapsing. But something feels claimed, unowned, unchosen. There's another moment most people recognize but rarely discuss. You imagine an alternate version of your life, not dramatically different, just slightly. A different risk taken, a different conversation had, a different no spoken at the right time. And you wonder how small decisions shaped everything, not because you made a mistake, but because you never paused long enough to examine the direction. That's the subtle tragedy of drift. It doesn't feel catastrophic. It feels reasonable, and reason is persuasive. It convinces you to stay, to maintain, to optimize, to improve the life you inherited, instead of questioning whether you ever meant to inherit it at all. And this is where the real tension lives. You are not trapped, but you are invested. You are not forced, but you are committed. You are not miserable, but you are unsettled. And unsettled is harder to justify than broken, because broken demands change. Unsettled demands honesty. And honesty requires you to look at something most people avoid. The possibility that your life was built on momentum, more than intention. And if that's true, then the discomfort you feel isn't irrational. It's information, not a sign that you failed, but a signal that something was never fully examined. And the longer you ignore that signal, the quieter it becomes. Until one day, you don't even recognize the voice that used to question. You only recognize the structure, and the structure keeps working. Even if you don't feel fully inside it, there is a cost to living on momentum. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't destroy your life. It slowly reshapes you. When you live without consciously choosing, you begin to outsource authorship to expectations, to norms, to what feels reasonable. At first, it feels efficient. You don't have to wrestle with uncertainty. You don't have to face doubt. You just follow what works. But over time, following what works becomes following what is available. And following what is available becomes following what is expected. And somewhere inside that chain, you stop asking what is yours. You start asking what fits. You adjust your personality to match environments. You adjust your ambition to match approval. You adjust your desires to match practicality. And each adjustment feels minor, responsible, mature. But maturity without self-awareness becomes quiet conformity. And conformity is seductive because it gives you belonging. It gives you clarity. It gives you structure, but it also narrows you. You don't notice the narrowing at first. You just feel calmer, less conflicted, less chaotic, less intense. And intensity can be exhausting. So the narrowing feels like relief until you realize it also reduced something essential. You no longer feel deeply moved. You no longer feel strongly pulled. You no longer feel sharply curious. You feel stable, and stability is praised. But stability without authorship becomes containment. There's a moment that hits many people unexpectedly. It doesn't happen in crisis. It happens in success. You achieve something you once thought mattered. A milestone, a title, a financial goal. And instead of exhilaration, you feel quiet, neutral, almost detached. You expected more, not applause, but aliveness. And when that aliveness doesn't arrive, you tell yourself you're just tired. But sometimes the absence isn't fatigue, it's disconnection. Because when you reach a destination you never consciously chose, the arrival feels hollow. You can't celebrate a place you didn't decide to go. That's the danger of drift. It doesn't feel wrong along the way. It only feels strange at arrival. And by then, you've built so much around it. Reputation, responsibility, identity. We rarely question identity once others rely on it. If people see you as stable, you stay stable. If people see you as practical, you remain practical. If people see you as successful, you protect that success. Because changing direction now feels disruptive, irresponsible, selfish. So you continue. You refine. You optimize. You improve the version of yourself that fits the structure. And the structure becomes stronger, more defined, more permanent. And slowly, the question shifts. It's no longer, did I choose this? It becomes, Can I even choose differently now? That question carries weight, because the longer you delay examination, the heavier the structure feels. But here's something uncomfortable. The structure is not a prison. It's a pattern. And patterns feel permanent only because they're repeated. You are not locked in. You are conditioned in. And conditioning is powerful. It teaches you what is acceptable, what is rewarded, what is safe. Over time, you mistake safety for truth. And that's where the quiet erosion happens. Not of your life, but of your sense of authorship. You begin to believe this is just who you are. But ask yourself honestly, is this who you are, or who you became in order to belong? That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Because if you became this way through repetition, through adjustment, through responding, then your identity might be more flexible than you think. But flexibility is terrifying, because flexibility means responsibility. It means you cannot blame circumstances forever. It means you cannot say, this is just my personality. It means you have to look at your life and ask, if I was free to choose again, would I choose this? That question is destabilizing because it exposes something we prefer not to see. You didn't fail. You adapted. But adaptation without awareness can slowly turn into disappearance. Not disappearance from the world, disappearance from yourself. And the world won't notice that. The world will reward your consistency. It will praise your discipline. It will celebrate your milestones. While something inside you quietly asks, is this mine? And if that question keeps returning, it's not weakness, it's awareness knocking. The danger isn't that you chose wrong. The danger is that you stopped choosing. The truth is, you didn't consciously betray yourself. You drifted. And drift is quiet. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like maturity. It feels like progress. It feels like being reasonable. That's why it's so hard to admit, because nothing about your life is catastrophic. You are not collapsing. You are not trapped. You are not miserable. You are functioning, and functioning is convincing. We're taught to believe that if something works, it must be right. If it's stable, it must be aligned. If it's successful, it must be chosen. But those are assumptions, not guarantees. And the discomfort you feel is not dramatic enough to justify tearing everything down. It's subtle, persistent, almost polite. It doesn't scream, it whispers. That whisper is easy to ignore until it repeats, until it follows you into quiet moments, until it shows up when no one else is around. And here's the part most people never say out loud. You can build an entire life without ever consciously deciding it was yours. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, because we are shaped by what surrounds us, by opportunity, by approval, by what feels safe. And safety is persuasive. But persuasion is not authorship. There's a difference between surviving well and choosing fully. You survived well. You adapted well. You responded well. You did what made sense. You built something stable. And stability deserves respect. But respect is not the same as resonance. And if you feel that slight distance, that subtle gap between who you are living as and who you feel you might be, that gap is not immaturity. It's awareness, not collapse. Awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable because once you see drift, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize that you may have inherited your direction, you can't pretend it was always intentional. And this is where the real question begins. Not, did I fail? Not, is my life bad? But something much quieter, much heavier. If you didn't consciously choose this, when was the last time you consciously chose anything? And if you can't answer that clearly, then maybe the discomfort you feel isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. Maybe it's the first sign that you're waking up.